So I think it's time to begin now. Those who are late can join as the lecture develops. I see that today we are now turning from, let's say, history to maybe to the method and theory. So without speaking anymore, I hand it over to you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for showing up again. Nice to see a few people from earlier and also a few new faces. So as you said, today we will I will round off wrap up the whole consideration on animism, and the first two lectures were very much focusing on the early colonial context of animism, and then the revisiting of the concept of animism in the study of religion and anthropology, but particularly like yesterday about the whole spectrum of phenomena, basically, that we can file under the rubric of a discourse of animism or an animistic discourse, however you want to call that. So yesterday we had a lot of concrete material, not so much theory, and today it will be the other way around. I apologize. I mean, if you like theory, you will be compensated for the lack of theory yesterday, because of what I want to try today is to pick up a couple of discussions that have been around for a few years, not only in the study of religion, but also in larger contexts. That are related to what some people call the relational turn, and that's what I put in the title. That is because I think that animism is a very good example of how this relational turn has developed, basically, and what it entails. And today I want to broaden this perspective a little bit. It's not so much concretely about animism, but animism is an example of exactly this turn that I think we are in the middle of. And since the beginning of this century, there has been an important development in the humanities, but also in the natural sciences. And this development has challenged binary constructions of human, non-human, nature, culture, mind, body, and related tools of conceptualizing the world. This interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary conversation has resulted in fundamental changes in scholarly frames of analyzing the relationship between humans and other than humans. Those changes not only challenge discourses and analytical tools that arguably have been co-responsible for the planetary crises we are finding ourselves in, such as patriarchal, colonial, capitalist, and anthropocentric regimes. But they also explore new ways of orchestrating academic research and organizing institutional settings beyond the common divides between the humanities and the sciences. The academic study of religion has only reluctantly responded to these new developments. We talked about that yesterday a little bit. So it's not mainstreaming in the study of religion. Maybe it will be at some point. Such a reluctance is astonishing insofar as we may expect that the study of religion would be interested in new ways of thinking with the more than human, as this is a core aspect of the very thing we are working on. We are the expert on the things that don't really exist, right? Like gods and things. Yeah. On closer examination, though, it turns out that the study of religion has itself been part of patriarchal, colonial, capitalist, and anthropocentric regimes of mastery and exploitation. While there certainly has been critical self-reflection in parts of the field, dominant intellectual and organizational structures still operate within a frame that prioritizes the human over against the rest of the natural world. So what I want to do in this last part of my lectures is to sketch a study of religion that takes seriously what people today call the relational turn. I will add a couple of tools to our toolbox and suggest a theoretical and methodological scaffold. It's not more than that. It's really a sketch or a scaffold that can help us to renovate the study of religion in the 21st century. And I hope that these excursions into other fields and intellectual conversations will be interesting and stimulating for further discussion. The first tool I'd like to engage is the recent development of building naturalistic understandings of religion that overcome the anthropocentric regimes that have dominated the study of religion since its beginning. Many scholars today agree, Many scholars today agree that the academic study of religion is best described as a field rather than a distinct discipline with a methodological and theoretical frame of its own. With Richard King, we may also argue that, I quote, "What unites the field of the study of religion is neither a singular, essentialized, and stable object of study, religion, nor even the shared emergence of a distinctive disciplinary practice or enterprise, the history of religions or religious studies, but rather an ongoing commitment to the reproduction of the language game of religion itself. It is conversations about this category, about how it is to be defined and conceived as belief, sacred text, practice, community, experience, and so on, about how it is to be evaluated, understood, embraced, or rejected, that bring scholars of religion together into a distinctive field. Sustained scholarly conversations about religion is itself what constitutes the field of the study of religion." End quote. While it is important for every scholarly endeavor to clarify the object of its interest and the appropriate tools to study that object, this does not entail that religion is itself the only qualifier for such a study. Over against, I quote Taves, "the historical instability of our object of study," it is fair to say that critically engaging the very context in which religion has gained meaning and influence is one of the most important exercises of the study of religion today, as far as its conceptual work is concerned. That's also resonant with the discursive approach to religion that abstains from defining the thing itself, but uses the emergence of the terms and the discourses as the object that we are studying. This should be done without a stipulated definition of religion, a definition that could be applied beyond the very context of its emergence and cultural location. Bruno Latour's note that, I quote, "the task of defining and ordering the social should be left to the actors themselves, not taken up by the analyst," end quote, has been embraced by many scholars in the field of the study of religion. Being a concept that is deeply embedded in European cultural history, particularly linked to what is called Enlightenment and modernity, religion will always be dependent on and limited by European conventions, perceptions, and fantasies about the world. Some scholars of religion have made a move to introduce alternatives to religion in order to avoid the concept's colonial and hegemonic limitations. Indeed, the concept of worldview has gained tradition recently, building on Ninian Smart's important work in the field of religious studies. That's already more than 20 years old. An interdisciplinary dialogue has emerged that addresses human interest in ultimate questions as the emergence of worldviews, often with particular political implications. And Taves and Egil Asprem suggest an even broader use of the concept of worldview, seeking, I quote, "to naturalize worldviews by connecting them to a cognitive and ultimately biological explanatory scheme." Thus, in contrast to religions, which we view as a human cultural product, we ground the meaning-making processes that give rise to diverse cultures and worldviews in subpersonal appraisal processes that are operative not only in humans, but in other animals as well. End quote. This, according to Taves, offers a theoretical rationale for viewing lived or enacted worldviews as prior to rationalized or systematized worldviews. End quote. In doing so, her approach may be combined with Donovan Schaeffer's understanding of affect. Taves herself does not seem to go into that direction, and it remains unclear to me why Taves limits worldviews, I quote, worldviews to humans and any possible others insofar as they have the ability to articulate and reflect on these questions, that is, to approach them as questions, end quote. As I will point out later from the perspective of biosemiotics and critical post-humanities, this seems to be an unnecessary emphasis on human exceptionalism. To avoid such an emphasis, either in religion or worldview studies, it makes sense to look at approaches that merge biological research with humanities theories in the study of religion. Again, Taves has provided important input to this discussion. What she calls the building block approach to the study of religion differentiates between religions more broadly and the elementary phenomena that comprise these religions. Concretely, she suggests, I quote, that the elementary phenomena might best be understood broadly and generically as things that people consider special things for short, and that religions and spiritualities and philosophies are often organized around path schemas that involve special practices and or special goals. In their more elaborated forms, we can view religions, philosophies, paths, etc. as systems or frameworks for assessing, ranking, manipulating, and sometimes transcending things that matter, and thus are viewed as special, end quote. It's very clear that Durkheim comes up here very strongly with his definition of a religion, which is importantly not a generic definition of religion, right? It's a religion for him is defined as a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things, that is, things set apart and forbidden. So this is clearly visible in Taves' understanding of religion, but she develops Durkheim's interpretation further without necessary recourse to the religiously connotated concept of the sacred. Consequently, specialness, that's her term, is not a substitute for sacredness. That's a quote from her. Rather, Taves is situating sacrality as an amicably defined subset of the larger things, class of things people consider special. So religion is a subcategory of things of specialness, right? Yeah. Taves is not interested in offering stipulated definitions of religion, as these, quote, artificially stabilize our object of study and obscure what I believe we ought to be studying, the processes whereby people decide on the meaning of events and determine what matters most, end quote. Defining the object of the study of religion as what people identify as most important has a long tradition in the field, and it has the advantage that this understanding can be extended to non-human animals. At the same time, we need to critically address what the terms we and people refer to exactly. This conversation takes place within a European colonial setting, which marginalizes indigenous forms of reasoning that for a long time have operated without an exclusive focus on human perceptions. Humans are only one species of culture-creating animals, as Taves argues. In highlighting the biological aspects of what she calls the enacting processes of valuation, Taves notes, I quote, I do not mean to imply that the biological factors are determinative. Adoptions clearly demonstrate otherwise, but they do suggest that mammals are able to set some things apart as special without recourse to language. in contrast to what many of us in the humanities would tend to assume, end quote. This is an important step forward, but the description still thrives on the distinction between nature and culture. Only now the concept of culture is broadened and includes non-human animals. We see a similar reluctance with regard to the institutional organization of the field of the study of religion. While Taves clearly identifies the need to work collaboratively and in interdisciplinary structures, she's not interested in breaking down the walls between the humanities and the sciences. Rather, she wants to build bridges between these domains, and she suggests that, I quote, "we prepare at least some of our students to collaborate with others outside the humanities." Taves also still advocates the idea that there is a need for departments of religious studies, even if they no longer, quote, "have a monopoly on special things." She sees departments of religious studies as loci for studying things people consider special and the ways people incorporate them into and perpetuate them within larger social, cultural formations, whether or not people view these formations as religious. The reason why I've brought up Anne Tave's considerations here is because her approach is a direct representation and further development of relational thinking. It is a good preparation for overcoming the distinction between the humanities and the sciences in the study of religion. I do think, though, that we need to move a step further than Anne Taves suggests. To explain what I mean, let me turn to the interdisciplinary field of biosemiotics, which is the second element of our scaffolding here. Since the middle of the 20th century, semiotics has played a significant role in intellectual debates across philosophy, psychology, and cultural studies. Rather than looking at spoken language in particular, it sees language as just one variant of communication of science. Influential thinkers in this field include Gregory Bateson and Charles Sanders Peirce, as well as Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari. Over the last couple of years, something interesting happened. Scholars such as Jasper Hoffman, Gilbert Simonton, Paul Cobley, and Wendy Wheeler have made an effort to combine semiotics with ecological discussions and the emerging field of the environmental humanities. Let me discuss the importance of this development with reference to Wendy Wheeler's work. In what Wheeler and others now call biosemiotics, nature and culture are seen as science systems that are intricately intertwined and evolve in constant and dynamic exchange. By starting a conversation among philosophy, cybernetics, molecular biology, genomics, and other disciplines, biosemioticians aim at overcoming the strict separation of nature and culture, as well as the Cartesian body-mind dualism and the idea that the human mind is a passive receiver of information which subsequently is processed internally. Instead, as Wheeler explains, nature is self-creative, autopoietic. Mind is, with reference to Gregory Bateson, a relation, or more specifically, a sign relation. Furthermore, all beings are born with species-specific cognitive structures that make a difference in how they relate to their environment and their own development. Wheeler is interested in what she calls the ecological intertwining of flesh, sign, and world. And her primary, that's quote, and her primary purpose is to discuss biosemiotic insights in order to argue the case for a needful shift from the ontology of substance and essence that informs the metaphysics of modernity and towards a biosemiotics ontology of relations, end quote. By exploring the cultural implications of biosemiotics, she wants to point out its relevance for the environmental humanities. Wheeler positions herself very clearly in an animistic discourse, and she names it like that sees the natural world as alive and agentic. She argues that nature speaks, even though obviously not in a human language, but in the sense that the universe is made of signs that are legible to us. By supporting the idea that nature is not just an object of our observation, but an active participant in the communication process, she consciously inscribes her position in the natural philosophy tradition of natura naturans. Hence the idea, as Wheeler defines it, of nature doing what it does self-creatively. In this naturing or doing lies meaning, as it allows things to be and also to change. That explains why in biosemiotics, relations and relationality are key concepts that combine ecology, philosophy, and environmental humanities. It means, for instance, that a living being is not defined by genes, and indeed, the decoding of the genome did not help us to explain human life or natura naturans. Rather, the genes of living entities have the capacity to evolve in one way or another, depending on history, context, and relational decision. Life, then, as Wheeler says, is understood as relational becoming. What Wheeler regards as relational becoming can easily be linked to what Donna Haraway calls becoming with. It's the same idea, right? Only in different words. But also to biologist David George Haskell's thinking about the intelligence of plants. In The Songs of Trees, Haskell writes, I quote, "Part of a plant's intelligence exists not inside the body, but in relationship with other species. Root tips, in particular, converse with species from across a community of life, especially with bacteria and fungi. These chemical exchanges locate decision-making in the ecological community, not in any one species. It is the ecological community that provides the background against which relational intelligence and meaning-making take place." Wheeler and Haskell help us understand processes of meaning-making, in Tave's words, the organization of specialness, as something that integrates human perceptions in larger ecological settings. Such an understanding does not prioritize human perceptions or disconnect them from other than human bodies and worlds. Instead, it emphasizes entanglement and communication across species and life forms. Tying in with discussions across disciplines with Bruno Latour and Donna Haraway as strong voices in this conversation, humans are part of a complex agential network of planetary life. This brings me to another crucial category that I mentioned yesterday already, and which needs a bit of unpacking if we want to make productive use of it in theories of religious studies, and that's the concept of agency. And it's the third element of our scaffolding. The concept of agency has a long history in sociology, philosophy, and the study of religion. I won't go into all these details, but instead focus on recent developments within this intellectual debate. The concept of agency is a useful one if we want to understand the ontological and epistemological qualities of more than human worlds. Again, much of the fundamental questioning of human exceptionality has come from animal studies and related fields of inquiry. Against the backdrop of recent research, it has been pointed out that attributing agency to human animals only is a problematic act of anthropocentrism and speciesism, to use Singer's word. Theorizing other than human agency, however, is still fraught with feedback loops and challenges that make it hard to escape the Kantian frame of analysis, where it is me who attributes something. I am in this whole Kantian Western or European tradition, it is me as observer who decides what is true about the world. And there are influences that are processed internally, but I am the final authority to do that. And when I attribute agency to other than human agency, that is still my perception, and it can be interpreted as a kind of colonial move even to, it's all my perception that I project on someone else. That is one problem of attributing agency. One answer in the theoretical debate is, okay, let's not call this attributing, but acknowledging, which is something that's a little bit nicer, right? We acknowledge that the non-human agents have had agency all the time, we only haven't seen it, which in epistemological Kantian philosophy is just a variant of the first one. So it's not really a way to get out of this Kantian warning or loop in which we still talk about ourselves somehow in the sense, and will never be able to achieve a real understanding of the non-human. Therefore, to avoid one-sided perspectives and the problem of humans speaking for non-humans, understandings of agency have been put forward that locate agency in concrete encounters. What can be called situational or entangled agency is part of a discussion across various disciplines in the post-humanities or the humanities today that has become known as the relational turn again. A turn that includes or is informed by Emmanuel Levinas' ethics, Judith Butler's critical feminism, and other intellectual contributions. These discussions also build on relational approaches in the feminist ethics of care tradition of the 1970s, as well as on relational theories in psychoanalysis of the 1980s, which linked philosophical relational ontologies, that's a book title by Benjamin recently, to the humanities. Hence, a theory of agency that is fully aware of the problematic aspects of its own theorizing, the recursion Kant warns us against, only makes sense in a situational context and in a theoretical frame that does not monopolize human perspectives. As the scholar of religion J. Johnston notes, I think that's that quote, an environment that acknowledges other than human agencies, even if they cannot be entirely perceived, conceptualized, or known, is an ecology of other than human agency. Any such environment must be understood to be radically intersubjective, constituted by agencies invisible, simultaneously localized and dispersed, yet capable of maintaining individuated integrity. If we look for a robust theory that can help us in this endeavor, I think Karen Barat's agential realism is the most promising choice. Karen Barat is a quantum physicist and distinguished professor of feminist studies, philosophy, and history of consciousness. What a title, at the University of California, Santa Cruz. It is noteworthy that she thus is a colleague of Donna Haraway at the same institution. Barat combines the philosophical insights of quantum theory, particularly Niels Bohr's thinking, with critical theories in the humanities. A crucial move toward her agential realism is to replace the concept of interaction with that of intra-action. I warned you yesterday, I think, in the discussion already, that there's a little bit of jargon, but you have to come up with new terms to really try to find a new language. Intra-action is one of these. As she explains in her very influential monograph, Meeting the Universe Halfway, I quote, and that's the quote, the notion, or it begins earlier, the notion of intra-action is a key element of my agential realist framework. The neologism intra-action signifies the mutual constitution of entangled agencies. That is in contrast to the usual interaction, which assumes that there are separate individual agencies that precede their interaction, the notion of interaction recognizes that distinct agencies do not precede, but rather emerge through their interaction. It is important to note that the distinct agencies are only distinct in a relational, not in absolute sense. That is, agencies are only distinct in relation to their mutual entanglement. They don't exist as individual elements. She explains this on the basis, and that's Niels Bohr, basically quantum theory, on the basis of what you, maybe you know some of these kind of classical, like this double slit experiment where the particles go through both slits, even if it's only one particle, which is quite problematic to understand, yeah? But to wrap your head around that. And whenever you, also Heisenberg's security thing, Unschärferelation is not the insecurity, it's, anyway. But Heisenberg's thinking that when we observe something, we have impact, we change the result, and which is not a question of, which is not a question that we can solve with a better experiment. No, it's part of the theory. We will never escape this impact that we have as an observer on the observed thing. And that altogether is the phenomenon that includes the observer, therefore. Agency in this understanding is a quality of individuals, human or other than human, that emerges out of their being entangled in this phenomenon, for instance. It is not a quality that is inherent to or owned by an agent. She even uses this example that, and this is part of what Einstein used that example, that they always had a cigar when they went into the lab. And the cigar is part of the phenomenon, right? And the cigar is an agent in this sense because it influenced the whole phenomenon. Anyway, this opens the way for including all kinds of subject objects. That's another term I will use. Natural or cultural, material or abstract as integral elements of agential networks. In fact, agential realism dismantles the distinction between subject and object. Making use of Donna Haraway's earlier work on diffraction, which is also a quantum physics term, Barrett argues that our knowledges are not a reflection of reality. Rather, the way we look at the world is itself part of the apparatus or phenomenon that constitutes our knowledge about the world. Reality diffracts into several layers that are accessible to us and that we produce interactively with the other actors in our situational setting. I quote, in an agential realist account, discursive practices are not human-based activities, but specific material reconfigurings of the world through which boundaries, properties, and meanings are differentially enacted. This has important implications. Practices of knowing and being are not isolable. They are mutually implicated. We don't obtain knowledge by standing outside the world, that's Kant. Right? We know because we are of the world. We are part of the world in its differential becoming. The separation of epistemology from ontology is a reverberation of a metaphysics that assumes an inherent difference between human and non-human. Subject and object, mind and body, matter and discourse. Onto epistemology, the study of practices of knowing in being, is probably a better way to think about the kind of understandings that we need to come to terms with how specific interactions matter. Barrett's argument can easily be linked to the field of biosemiotics, as I explained earlier. It clearly resonates with Wendy Wheeler's arguments I mentioned. These interpretations of quantum physics and semiotic on ecology, interactively read together with critical theory and the humanities, make it clear that our tools for interpretation are themselves part of the diffraction that co-creates knowledges. What is more, the agential networks that constitute the situational interaction do not only include humans, they also include non-human actors on equal basis. subject objects who contribute to what we know about the world. The agency of these subject objects is not a characteristic intrinsic to their ontology, something they own or have, but the result of the entanglement with other actors, including ourselves. Situational or entangled agency, then, is located in humans, other animals, material subject objects, and even in non-material members of the agential network, like ancestors, gods, spirits, angels. Okay, in our attempt to overcome the conceptual divides that the relational turn critiques, we have in our toolbox a naturalistic approach to religion, the philosophical considerations of biosemiotics, and the theory of agential realism. I think we can use one more tool that emerges from the same intellectual milieu, but adds a further dimension to the discussion, particularly when it comes to concrete forms of doing science. I mean the field of critical post-humanities. There's a lot of confusion about the post-human. Some branches of thinking past the human envision a world where humanity becomes meaningless and will be replaced by technology. This is often called transhumanism. What I'm referring here, however, is quite the opposite of transhumanism. Post in this context, like also in post-colonialism, post-capitalism, whatever what have you. Post in this context does not mean the end of humanity, but a transformative understanding of what humanity means. Consequently, post-humanism is understood as a process of critical self-reflection and as an attempt to overcome the binaries of human, non-human, mind, body, and nature culture. What is more, critical post-humanity or critical post-humanism aims at transforming and undisciplining the humanities into a form of scholarly engagement that creates a transversal field of knowledge consisting of human and other than human interactions. This program is both scholarly and political, geared toward establishing what is today called post-humanities, for instance, at the Post-Humanities Hub at the University of Linköping in Sweden that exists for 15 years now. And it's done wonderful work. Over the past 15 years, many scholars have provided highly important contributions to the development of this field of inquiry. One influential voice is Rosi Braidotti. Since her work can also illuminate the study of religion, let me discuss some of her ideas here. Braidotti starts her argument with the observation that there has been an exuberant growth in a number of creative transdisciplinary hubs, which have generated their own extra-disciplinary offspring. This is a quote. They seldom coincide with the traditional humanities disciplines and are also fueled by marginal and hybrid fields of knowledge, end quote. These new organizational hubs often go by the name of studies. Braidotti lists women's, gay and lesbian, gender, feminist and queer studies, race, post-colonial and subaltern studies, alongside cultural studies, film, television and media studies. These are the prototypes of the radical epistemologies that have voiced the situated knowledges of the dialectical and structural others of humanistic man, end quote. It is clear from this outline that feminist and queer studies have always been post-humanist. What Braidotti calls the nomadic exodus from disciplinary homes goes along with new forms of accountability and authority. It is a process that Foucault and Deleuze called the philosophy of the outside, thinking of, in, and for the world, a becoming world of knowledge production practices. What is more, after their nomadic meandering outside the disciplinary origins, these scholarly practices are crossbreeding, as she says. Braidotti notes they are generating new discursive practices, which I call the nomadic or critical post-humanities. Hence, the critical post-humanities today are not interdisciplinary, but post-disciplinary. As offshoots of the established studies, they can also be called supradisciplinary. Supradisciplinary discourses not only reflect different patterns that the hegemonic discourses that traditionally disciplined their subjects, they also imply qualitative shifts in how scholars do their work, both in terms of strong ethical commitments and integrative research tools that strategically include marginalized and minority voices. The result is a new transversal field of knowledge production that is shaped by transversal alliances. In Braidotti's words, this transversal alliance today involves non-human agents, technologically mediated elements, earth others, such as land, waters, plants, animals, and non-human inorganic agents, plastic, wires, information highways, algorithms, etc. A post-human ethical practice involves the formation of a new alliance, a new people, she says even. These are quite radical implications for scholarly identities and practices. And they have certainly met with a lot of resistance from the established disciplinary guardians of knowledge. But these radical shifts may be exactly what we need today. If we compare critical post-humanities with biosemiotics, we see a shared interest in forming new alliances within agential networks of planetary communication. To think ethically, theoretically, and methodologically beyond the human, and to link these considerations to scholarly practices in the production of knowledge is, I would say, the call of the day. But what does all this have to do with the study of religion? How can we build a robust theoretical framework that allows us to leave anthropocentric understandings of religion behind? What would a scholarly engagement with religion look like if we would nomadically leave its disciplinary frame? Maybe the study of religion is well prepared to inscribe itself into a transversal arrangement of knowing. What is more, as scholars of religion, we are quite used to engaging with agential networks and non-human agents, such as gods, bodhisattvas, sacred animals, healing waters, amulets, speaking stones, etc. All these agents that the scholar of religion J. Johnston calls troublesome objects. It is illuminating to read J. Johnston and Rosie Braidotti diffractively against the background of agential realism. In Stack and Stone, that book, Johnston demonstrates that in a world that is agentic beyond the confines of the human, we are never the masters of the world or the masters of knowing. In fact, as Johnston claims, being a scholar today implies, I quote, giving up discourses of mastery and cultivating an attitude of not knowing. These regimes, end quote, these regimes of mastery are at the bottom of the perilous situation we find ourselves on this planet today. They materialize in current dealings with nature, with gender, with race, with politics, with economic power. They also influence our way of thinking and understanding, that is, the epistemologies and ontologies our scientific and cultural systems run on. If we are serious in our attempt to break out of these regimes of mastery, we will need to explore our place in an entangled network of subject-objects that renders our knowledge vulnerable and dependent on the epistemologies and agencies of others. Coming from a different place, Braidotti argues similarly. I quote, "Post-human thinking is a relational activity that occurs by composing points of contact with a myriad of elements within the complex multiplicity of each subject and across multiple other subjects situated in the world. thinking takes the form of cartographic renderings of embedded and embodied relational encounters. These encounters can be with texts, institutions, or other concrete social realities, or with people. End quote. Critical posthumanities, in their attempt to work for a rigorous change in the production of knowledge, necessarily imply a qualitative shift in academic practice as well, rather than just adding quantitative data through the inclusion of other than human agents. This resonates with Johnson's call for, I quote, for bewilderment, or bewilderment, it's there. Bewilderment to be treated within the academy not as a shameful state of ineptitude, a failure of mastery, but as a strategically invited state of creative confusion that opens the subject to the other. Academy for Johnson should be a place and state where insightful conversations ensue and the self and multiple others transform within the relation. Johnson's suggestion to adopt a position of strategic inadequacy is the consequence of acknowledging radical entanglement. What we are doing is embrace our situated knowledges, which Don Haraway already recommended in 1988, as well as our entanglement, turning this acknowledgement into a positive assessment rather than seeing it as a problem. Subsequently, we start a strategic remapping of scholarly fields that take more than human knowing seriously in our work as scholars of religion. We then ask, in this transversal field of research, what are the qualitative criteria and analytical indexes that inscribe discourses on religion in the remapping of scholarly production of knowledge? In my view, the transversal alliance that can be built around what today is called the academic study of religion would, and this is very tentatively, just more brainstorming, include the following: human agents across the most diverse groups of people with special attention to underrepresented voices. Non-human agents, including living subject objects such as animals and plants, but also subject objects that are such as gods, ancestors, or spirits. Earth others, landscapes, waters, ecosystems, stars. Non-human organic and inorganic agents, plastic, wires, algorithms, paintings, artworks, but also material products of religious practice. Technologically mediated elements, such as archaeological sources, books, TVs, computers, smartphones. Diverse soundscapes without hegemonic differentiation between music and other sounds. All forms of aesthetic sensual experience that mediate between the human and the more than human, including the non-linguistic languages of science that biosemiotics addresses in the natural world. It is clear that such a remapping is a queering and undisciplining of the academy. It is what Johnson calls a bewilderment of the study of religion, which nonetheless creates a, as she says, place and state where insightful conversations ensue, and the self and multiple others transform within the relation. It also puts into practice Braidotti's argument that building, I quote, transversal interconnections across the disciplines and society is the way to implement an ethical praxis that aims to cultivate and compose the new collective subject. This subject is an assemblage, that is a mix of humans and a mix of humans to non-humans, Zoe, geo, techno-bound computational networks and earthlings, linked in a vital interconnection that is smart and self-organizing, but not chaotic. End quote. The knowledge that this transversal field will no longer claim hegemony beyond its place in the web of entangled agencies. It will define its perspectival arrangement of knowing with reference to at least three levels of entanglement. The first one is humans who engage directly with our research. These are peers from various academic fields and habitats, like in this room, but also stakeholders and subject objects across society, other readers and journalists and whatever. Second, non-human subject objects whom we invite to the conversation. We are open to listen and willing to learn their languages and semiotic communications. And the third one, entanglements with subject objects whose agency, presumably, does not come from their inner motivation and livelihood, but is based on entanglement. Examples of situational agency include material things, material and immaterial texts and images, but also subject objects such as gods and ancestors. Some participants in this ecology of knowing may be filed in one or the other category, or actually in more than one. It is the constant negotiation of and work on these entanglements that characterize human quests for knowledge. So, like at the beginning of my talks on Tuesday, let me again ask, why animism? Bring these three lectures to a conclusion. I hope it has become clear how the potentially quite boring concept of animism can open up all kinds of doors to understanding the dynamics of religion and its study in the 21st century. Animism, in my view, is not a good candidate for an analytical tool for the study of religion. Even if we would call the phenomenon under research new animism, like what many colleagues in the field do, or relational animism to distinguish it from Tyler's ontological failure animism discussion. As a generic concept, it is still fraught with colonial problems that make a neutral use of the term quite difficult. We can, of course, limit the term's range locally, like saying Euro-American animism. That's basically what we're studying on the new animism. Or historically, looking at certain phases. Studying discourses on animism or animistic discourses is a different thing. And I hope it has become clear that you can study something as animistic discourse without defining animism as in a generic way. It's more a bottom-up approach. An approach like that takes a concept of animism and analyzes its function and connections in various societal and academic contexts. Being critical of the concept of animism as an analytical tool, however, doesn't mean that the worldviews, ontologies, and cosmologies that underlie what people call animism don't actually exist. There was also a question that we had in discussion yesterday. There's no denying of the phenomena themselves, and people call things in a certain way that then scholars describe as animism or something else. So it's not an ontological statement about whether or not these things actually exist. The question is, how do we want to call them? For me, analytical categories that work better would be something like relational ontologies, or cosmologies of entanglement. Just brainstorming about more neutral ways of calling these phenomena or putting them into frames that try to avoid these traps that we've seen are quite a few out there. Or simply the awareness of situated becoming, which then refers both to the ontologies and epistemologies that are otherwise habitually and artificially distinguished. What the study of animism can tell us is that we need to give up discourses of mastery and cultivate an attitude of not knowing, as Jay Johnston says. Hence, whatever we think about religion, spirituality, worldviews, or meaning-making is a diffractional result of complex assemblages of various elements. What we perceive is the interference pattern of the phenomenon we are part of. And if we change the phenomenon a little bit, the interference pattern might look like spirituality, might look like worldview, might look like religion, or what have you. Knowledge and agency are decentered, which means that they are located in ecologies of agency that include but are not controlled by human actors. Humans don't have a privileged understanding of the world. Their knowledge is as vulnerable and interactive as all life on this planet. If this is something animism studies can teach us, we're a step further, I think. Thank you very much.
So I think there's plenty of room for all kind of questions here. Is there any?
Yes, thank you so much. It was intellectually very stimulating and challenging. I was trying to analyze the vocabulary that you used and that you didn't use. And you discussed religion, I think, without ever mentioning the concept of belief and believing, which is quite a novel, radical approach to religion. But I think about the possible diversity of this epistemological concepts and nuances that are there. Do you think, is it a good idea, or is it possible to just to jettison, to neglect words, concepts like guessing or wondering or disbelieving or believing, all these modalities that evoke the world, the social relationships, including the subject, objects, and the other humans and the animals. That I wonder if the radically analytical approach to religion, doesn't it get too technological on some hand? Shouldn't we also think about synthetic concepts to bring things together? It's a bit vague question, but just a response to a wonderful lecture.
I don't know if I fully understand exactly, but I have an idea of what you, and it certainly what we study in this is basically a bottom-up approach. Basically, okay, what we see, we see things happening. People communicate, people including non-humans as well, and sometimes human people communicate with non-human people, and the history of religion is full of that example. We're even experts for that, maybe more than others. And what comes up there in the sense of meaning making or identifying something that is more important that entails Durkheimian interpretation, some things are special, and we arrange, and foxes do burial rituals, for instance. We can compare foxes' burial rituals to signify something that is important to other things, and this is part of the equation there. And then these terms like believing, maybe also belonging, to use another famous pair of words. And then some people say, well, believing is a very Protestant understanding, right? In the Catholic tradition, it's not about believing, it's about belonging or about tradition, habitual things of doing. So these are all situational definitions somehow, or not definitional, yeah, they turn out to be definitions, but they are situational description of, okay, in that sense, it makes sense. In that context, it might make sense, but not as a generic part of a generic definition. And we still can include this as in a certain phenomenon, in a certain arrangement, as something, okay, that produces the term believing as something that is meaningful, maybe. But this cannot, as soon as we look into different contexts, we also will have other results. So I don't know if that's a, yeah.
Yes, well, I absolutely agree that it's possible to study religion without the concept of a belief and believing. But can we study human life and religion as a part of human life without belief, which might be knowledge-based, not the other way around, that we build up the belief and faith and relationships on knowledge, including scientific knowledge, but also vernacular knowledge. Mm-hmm.
I don't think that we can do that without. I agree. I agree absolutely, and that there's a certain common denominator, I think, if you look at the human species, we are certainly a storytelling species. Maybe more than other species. We identify with stories. And religion is one form, one mode of telling stories about our place in the world, our history, our expectation, or whatever. And we're telling stories all the time, right? And science is a different mode, but it's also only makes sense in a narrative form. The mathematics itself does not make any sense. Like the Hubble telescope does not produce photos, right? Only the NASA special office for communication produces the photos that we think, oh, that's a Hubble. No, the Hubble does not make photos. So this is another way of narrative and making sense of our place in the world. So this meaning-making mode is certainly something that is crucial to being human, and maybe also in distinction to non-human people, but to call one, that does not necessarily mean that we need religion to explain that. And I think that's also how I understand Donovan Schafer and Taves and all these people. Yeah.
Thank you for. Kas see töötab veel? Thank you for this very interesting and very important lecture. And in my opinion, it's a direction where the study of religion should move, and all the humanities maybe. And I also became aware more or got an idea from your lecture why we are stuck, or why the mainstream approaches don't follow this, because for us it has always been so important, the distinguishing between the epistemology and ontology, that there is a huge gap between them. And I have read some sources from 17th century, like written in Estonia, in German language, from 1640s, and there is no such gap there, because it's a pre-Cartesian time, and there is this Aristotelian metaphysics that is behind this mode of thinking, and it's in a way it's more simple to explain the things in that frame.
Yeah. No, thank you. Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree that that's a very good example of that, even if sometimes stereotypically the European or the Western, or it's even worse, yeah, the European thinking is in this binaries. That's not true. And also the European tradition provides many alternatives to that as well. And it's mainly what we see in the last 200, 300 years, and it has a lot to do with capitalism and other political and colonialism, and with these factors, rather than just only with the philosophical underpinnings of these, that we have the situation today we are in. And it is interesting to look into earlier concepts also within the European tradition as well. I fully agree. Yeah. And the same can also be found in the projection of alternatives to the indigenous, as if all these indigenous communities would think the same thing. Yeah? That's another quite colonial gaze, in a sense, then turned into a very, very, very positive thing that we can learn from them, but that also still puts them in a certain category that they haven't changed in 10,000 years or something like that. So that can work both ways, I think, and it starts with really putting these different perspectives into one room, basically, and then start a conversation about that.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to follow on from here. In the beginning, you said that this relational turn and attacking binary constructions is not mainstream in religious studies, and that the response has been modest. I would disagree, because if you look, there is a lot of all kinds of concepts and strategies. For instance, yesterday you mentioned Ursula Goodenough, her religious naturalism. Then there is Paul Bramadat with reverential naturalism. Then there is atheist spirituality, then there is spiritual atheism, and so on and so on and so on. So actually there are quite a lot of these kind of concepts, and I think that they have appeared within, I guess, some last 20 years or so. It says something that we are at least in the beginning of some change. For instance, when people indeed forget that belief is or was central to religion. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot for that comment. I mean, it's great if that's the case. I mean, can also, and it may also be depend a little bit on the context. Like Ursula Goodenough, but that's also one of the observations that I have. You have these scholars like Goodenough, who's a biologist. She's not a religious studies scholar. So, and I don't know many religious studies colleagues who actually read her emergence biology and so on. And but I mean, this is a little bit also confirmation of the observation that Braidotti had. We have these meandering fields and these nomadic sciences, somehow like Goodenough, and also Jane Goodall, and all these people come from biology, but then writing about ethics and kinship ethics and all kinds of things in a way that's going beyond the boundaries of their discipline somehow, and that's certainly something we see. What I see in the study of religion, and maybe it's also worse in Germany than in other countries, but also in the US, there's this very strong, so we talked about the cognitive science of religion. They are also an example. They would not buy into this, right? Most of them. But some of them would then link that to biosemiotics that are open. Anyway, but there are fields where you, for instance, the linking of epistemology and, like what you said, and ontology, that we know because we are of the world, then you cannot retain the amic-ethic distinction anymore, right? Or the insider-outsider. And many people are still quite strongly saying, okay, well, no, okay, as a scholar, no, no, that is a different cup of tea. But saying that I am, my body, my whole thing is wired into the situation, and that's why I see certain things. That is not objective, but I'm a subject-object in this network. Then it doesn't make sense to claim that I have a kind of superior knowledge about what's going on than the participants, or qualitatively different than the amic one. And that does not mean, and I think we had the discussion yesterday, it does not mean that I'm saying this is all the same. But the criteria for differentiation are different. It is my perspective. I have a different role here as a scholar, and people know that I am the scholar here, and I take notes, and the others don't, or whatever. So that gives me a different status, I'm a different element of the whole thing. But the production of knowledge is still the whole thing. It's not my production. And so that would be then a description that would be more in sync with these relational models, I would think.
In the meanwhile, I thought of something I'd like to ask. So, when I listened to also this conversation here, and when we were talking about worldviews, and there was this question about distinction in epistemology and ontology, and whether belief and how to relate to it, and all of this in a way is on the, like if I am tempted to generalize by using some placeholder to signify it, is that this is on the level of how people think about things, how to overcome dualities and all. But at the same time, in study of religion, we have paid more and more attention to what people do, the whole focus on practices, rituals, and when you, in your first lecture, mentioned sort of the discourse is words in action, not just words. But if we take like let's say the Austin's how to do things with words, or Roy Rappaport's like the rituals in themselves communicate, you don't need the whole discourse side of it, then is it like could the same story be told from the perspective of focusing on actions and practices and not like focusing all the time on how people think? Or what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. You can broaden the perspective, and you get. I mean that is an advantage and a disadvantage at the same time, because religious studies is it's already a very vast field. But if you broaden it like this, and I had a conversation with Anne Taves about that. I mean, she gets the critique already. It is so vague. Everything can be religion. And yeah, sure, yeah, but yeah. So, but and she said that what I'm suggesting is even broader than that, because but it comes with a price. But I think it makes sense, and to think, if I don't define religion, but if I have to describe what I think that we are studying is how humans, if we look at human religion, Donovan Schaefer would broaden that concept, but if we study human activity, then it is we're interested in how humans organize their relation with the more than human world. That's my bottom line of things. So we're not so much interested only in how sociologically, like humans organize themselves in groups or whatever, or psychology or whatever, but everything that we find interesting to study includes some kind of more than human reference. And that is something, it's not a definition of religion, but it is, for me, it's a hunch in a kind of bottom of thumb, rule of thumb understanding of what we are actually studying. And then you have all kinds of subcategories. That religion can be some of them. Environmental law is exactly that. Yeah, we organize our relation with the North Sea, for instance, if we set up a national park or something like that. That is part of what we study, and it does make sense to say that the one thing is for the study of religion and the other thing is for, I don't know, landscape studies or whatever. So that would be a new way of organizing this knowledge quest, in a sense that is nomadic in Braidotti's ways, to say, okay, let's have a department or a faculty of human relationships with the more than human, something like that. And then you have all kinds of subcategories. But that's maybe really some vision for the future. It's not very realistic that it will happen, but that would be in the line of that thinking. Yeah.
So in a way, I understand you're saying that basically this could be viewed from the perspective of more of action too. It's not a contradiction in the more worldview focused approach of your. Okay.
No, worldview would be easily integrated into that as one subcategory or something that you encounter when you unpack this. Yeah.
So, anyone else? Oh, okay. Online.
I guess your concern could be responded that what this kind of thinking attempts to achieve is friendship with the world. And this friendship includes belief in your friend, wishing well for your friend, going to help the friend when in need, and so on. So it is epistemology of being in the world, or for being in the world, so that nobody's excluded. Maybe that would be an easy way to say it.
Yeah, that would certainly be something that resonates with Graham Harvey's understanding of animism. What we had yesterday, that he calls this a that the world is full of persons, only some of them happen to be human, right? And then how we communicate with these persons in a relational setting, that is what animism is about. And then he says exactly the same. The task is to become good people, to be nice, and to care for the others in this relational ecological setting that we derailed somehow in some sense. And this is going back into healing these relationships as well as part of what he calls animism.
Yeah, just before I give it to Madis, back to the non-disciplinarity of the study of religion, and I agree that it's a huge field surrounded by many disciplines, approached by many disciplines, and one of those is what we call here folkloristics of religion. And you mentioned the story worlds, and this is indeed the potential of mapping the field of religion from a slightly different angle. Because where you find these subject objects, non-human agents, you take spirits, you take ghosts, whatever, you take stones or waters, and asking the question whether they have epistemology, whether they feel, whether they act based on some emotions. Yes, of course they do. Stones can get angry, or stones that they do think, and the same, there is a lot of speculation about what the devil feels, or it is what the spirits feel, how they react to the humans. So it's an interaction, imaginary interaction between the different agents that inhabit these story worlds, but it also gets engaged with the social and physical world, the natural world. So indeed, I think we cannot talk about the one world, but there are multiple worlds, and then story worlds is maybe only one approach. But that's how we have been used to study these peripheral or marginalized areas in religion that are very often overlooked by the mainstream or the institutional approach. It is people who study the holy scripts and texts, but there is a lot of that you take inspiration from your talk. Just a few comments, and I give it to Madis, so it is maybe you have a response.
Yeah, I think if you look at the institutionalization of knowledge and the organization of knowledge production in European and then globalized universities, this is a reification in a discursive language. This is a reification of orders of knowledge, and they are very recent. Right? That we have all these disciplines and that we have natural sciences and philosophy, and all these things are quite arbitrary, and they're not arbitrary because there's also a certain programmatic underlying these distinctions. But they then reproduce themselves somehow in these same patterns of knowledge. They legitimize these orders of knowledge that help them come into existence, and then it's very hard to overcome this order of knowledge within these organizational structures. So you really have to think about different ways of ordering knowledge production in a sense that then also will produce different knowledges. And I agree. So the intellectual and the institutional history are closely entangled.
So yeah, thank you very much. My question is, who are we? So what we learned throughout all the three brilliant lectures is that all the study of animism, it stems or roots on this colonial legacy in Western Europe. From the very Edward Taylor, and today Western people, we maybe have to become the better persons and become friends with everybody, every being. So not everybody here, but most of us are Estonians, and actually we don't have that kind of colonial feeling of this colonial guiltiness in our cultural history, in our thinking. We understand it perfectly theoretically, if I may say it. But, yeah, can you give advice us? Yeah, if you understand what I mean. So,
yeah, I understand what you mean, and it's a very important question, not just in this individual concrete case, but also in general. And that's part of this whole critique as well. Who is this we? Because that's also part of the queering, part of the feminist and the different phases of feminists, that also then the intersectional kind of definition of what is the situatedness of our knowledge. And that includes all kinds of categories, national categories, but also then differences in privilege and all these questions that enter into the equation. And I also don't think that we means a certain group that is easily identifiable, but I mean historical structures that are also operative here. This is not an island where there is no patriarchy. This is not an island where there is no capitalism, where there is no distinction between culture and nature. I mean, your faculties at this university are very similar to the ones in Groningen. I mean, there's not so much Estonian singularity in this part of, and I would not call this Western in the sense, right? And the example that I had from University of Linköping with this post-humanities hub is an example where they tried to build different faculties in a different ways, and that's not so easy to put into practice. And so in that sense, I clearly I hear you, but I would not assume that the Estonian society is untouched by these regimes of exploitation in many ways. But maybe you're in a better situation to think into alternatives and illuminate the more strongly involved locations in this exploitational regimes.
Yeah. So anyone else with a question? We have a little bit of time still. Or? If not, I think we will conclude here and thank Kocku for all these interesting lectures and discussions.
Thank you so much for the discussion. I learned a lot. Yeah.